very good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a live edition of Open Mic on this Wednesday night, February 15th, 2012. I'm your host, Michael Cuomo, and alongside me, the much anticipated special guest that I've been trying to get on for several months. He is here, and Mr. GARETT ARGIANAS, thank you so much.
Glad to be here.
For coming on. GARETT, as we all know, is from the currently with NBC Connecticut Channel 4 up in West Hartford, right?
Yeah, but we cover the whole state. So
you do the whole state, right? You don't discriminate.
Not at all.
So thank you for coming on Open Mic. I gave you an Open Mic mug, as I do with all the guests prior to the show.
You only charged me $10 for it, so that's good.
Yeah. Well, that was to fill it up with that special beverage. But
it'll be an interesting hour, folks. Stay tuned.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get this weather forecast right after we're done drinking that.
It might help.
But welcome aboard, and we have a great show planned for all you viewers out there. As you know, I've had it on Facebook. We've been promoting GARETT's appearance. The phone number to call in is on the screen. It's 203-265-6310. We'll be here till 9 o'clock taking your calls live. We have a lot of, I want to get into some questions with GARETT regarding, meteorology, his time at Channel 4. We're going to talk a little bit about weather. We have a poll question to get to, and we're going to try to get this all crammed in, plus take your calls, comments, suggestions, questions, all by 9 o'clock. So, well, GARETT, let's start with first things first.
Okay.
If there is such a thing. Let's talk a little bit about your career in television. What made you want to get started, if anything, in meteorology?
Yeah.
How did you go along in that field?
All right, well, first let me say it's glad to be in the 203. I remember when 203 was the only area code in Connecticut. Of course,
right.
that changed a while back, but I grew up in southern Connecticut in Shelton.
Oh, okay.
So I'm very familiar, of course, with the shoreline and
Yeah.
southern parts of the state, as well as northern Connecticut. And of course, having worked in the Hartford area, I live up that way at this point.
Yeah.
But ever since I was a little guy, I was always interested in weather. And there's a lot of weather people will come on and say there was a big storm, there was a hurricane or a blizzard or something like that kind of piqued his or her interest in weather. I was just someone who liked weather. Mm-hmm. Whether it was a sunny day or a snowy day, maybe not as much a rainy day, but all different kinds of weather. And what's really interesting around here is that we have all these different kinds of weather that can happen in just our little state. Sometimes all at the same time you can have different kinds of weather. But you think about a place where we have blizzards, you have hurricanes, we have had tornadoes, just about anything short of maybe a dust storm, probably around here. So when I was a little kid, at a young age, I said, I kind of like this, and something I want to pursue. And I'm lucky, I had a family that was very supportive of that, and a lot of teachers that were very supportive over the years. And so I went through the Shelton public school system and graduated in 1997 from Shelton High. And
so you just gave away your age, which was my next question.
That's right.
31?
32.
32. Okay.
Yes. So, I did that, and I went to school for meteorology. Went to the University at Albany, which is one of the SUNY schools. They actually played UConn in the NCAA tournament a few years ago. I remember it was the Great Danes, but
oh, nice.
Yeah, it was interesting. But anyway, UConn won, so you know. But as usual.
Yeah.
But so I went to school up there, and I studied meteorology, and I also studied math, and that's something that people don't realize, I think, about meteorology in general, is the amount of mathematics and physics. It's very, very intensive. It's very scientific. It's very mathematical. And sometimes people think, it's about looking up the clouds. And that's important. You have to be able to identify clouds and know what things mean. But what we studied was the real physics, the kind of mechanisms, if you will, behind what weather is. And that's where all these equations come into play and that kind of thing. So a lot of people, I think, are fooled by the amount of math going in. They don't realize it.
And once they get into it and take the courses, if they're not a big math fan like myself, they just seem to maybe change majors?
Yeah,
is that a fair?
Yeah, I mean, if you want a Bachelor of Science degree, you need the math. But what's good about it is that there are introductory courses or science classes. There's ways to learn about weather without having to dig through all the math, and there's a lot of people that don't want to do it, and
Right.
frankly I don't sit there and calculate equations every day anymore. That's something you study in school, and
Yeah, you tend not to use it as...
you don't use it as much.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's kind of where that happened. And career-wise, I started working in Albany, New York, so when I graduated, or actually before I graduated, I got a job.
Oh, great.
Doing the weather at the CBS affiliate, WRGB, which happens to be the first TV station in the country. GE, General Electric, is Schenectady. They're still in Schenectady, and they were huge.
Yeah.
And they actually invented television. It was radio with pictures, is what they called it back in the late 1920s.
Wow.
And so that was a pretty interesting place to work, and worked there for a couple of years. I ended up coming back home to Connecticut.
Great.
Yeah.
And did you enjoy growing up in Shelton? I don't know much about Shelton. I'm kind of a East Haven, Wallingford.
Okay.
I know the taxes are cheap in Shelton.
That's a big a point for people living in Shelton. Yeah, taxes are still low there, and people appreciate that.
Draws a lot of business.
It does,
Businesses, right?
Yeah, and the city has grown dramatically, over the years. And I still have my family mainly is still in southwestern Connecticut. So I was just in Shelton yesterday, actually visiting my mom, and my
Nice.
dad's down that way too. So that's nice to have that connection and not have to live halfway across the country, which is something that is a reality in the field I'm in. Is people have to move around a lot, and you'll notice different anchors or other people or whoever that work on TV, in the stations around here, and they may move on somewhere else.
Right.
Versus some who make more of a home. They're either from here or they like it here and want to stay.
Yeah. Well, Garrett, if you don't mind, we got our first caller of the
Great.
night. Hello, caller. You're live and open mic with special guest Garrett Argianas.
Hi, Garrett.
Hi.
I just had to call in. It's so exciting to see someone like you on public TV. That's so great.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Yeah.
We're glad to have him on.
Yeah, you guys look great. You kind of match. I don't know if you realize that.
We coordinated. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about this before the show.
It looks great. Garrett, I've been a huge fan of yours. I followed you since you started with NBC, and then you made the switch, and now you're back. I always, I've enjoyed watching the weather, and I was wondering if, I'm sure you guys were going to touch on this, but can we expect any winter? What's kind of going on with that? And I'll hang up and listen to the answer, but thank you very much for coming.
All right. Glad.
Thank you for the
calling.
call.
Appreciate it. I think I knew this was going to come up.
Yeah, we're going to touch up on this, so she
Yeah.
beat us to it, but go
It's
ahead.
on our list.
What's your take on the winter just being very, mild, no snow practically to speak of?
I mean, it's unusual, to say the least. Not unprecedented, though, and that's something that, I did want to point out is, we've not really had much snow after October, which is something else we can talk about. But,
Yeah.
once that storm hit, the winter months haven't really been winter-like at all. We've had very warm weather. And if you go back in the data, at least for the Hartford area, which is kind of the main focus for weather data in Connecticut,
Right.
we've been above normal temperature-wise, at or above, since early last year. So we've had a stretch of, I think it's been 10 months now, of above normal temperatures. We're way behind in snow. Now, what I will say is that weather patterns can change quickly.
Yeah.
And that is something that we do have to be on our toes. There's no guarantee that just because we haven't had any snow now, that we're not going to have snow, or maybe we won't have any snow. It's just the way it is. So, you can't necessarily connect one to the other, and that's where that October storm, I think a lot of people were fooled and thought, oh boy, what's this winter going to be like?
Right.
But, I pointed out then, you can't connect, a storm in October to what's going to happen in January because they're just too far disconnected.
Correct. We are going to get to another call, and we'll touch back on this. Hello, caller. You're live and open mic with Garrett Argianas.
Good evening, Mr. Cuomo.
Good evening. Is this Mr. Dacey?
Yes, it is.
How are you, sir?
Good. First of all, I vote for no snow.
I do too.
After not being able to get out of my house last year until March.
Yeah, it was a long winter for you.
So I'm really enjoying this winter.
Absolutely.
But I just want to say I'm very happy with your guest this evening. I had the opportunity to meet Garrett a few years ago back at Zandri Stillwood Inn when he hosted the MDA telethon with our good friend, Counselor John Sullivan.
Oh, nice.
And it was my pleasure to present Garrett with a check that evening for a fundraiser that I did for MDA.
Great.
Yeah, that's terrific. And that's something that is such a nice part of the work that we do. And you notice that all the anchors at all the stations get involved in a lot of community projects. And the MDA Telethon, of course, is one of the biggest things that any station will do in a year. And it's so nice to just get out and just to meet people even, and just to help raise money for really good causes. And that's a terrific event at Zandri's. You know, it's always a fun time and draws a great crowd, and it's always a lively crowd. And you know, the other thing is it gets late into the night. The telethon, at least in previous years, and they've changed things since, but you know, the party would go until I think it was like midnight or something like that, and there's always the Hardy Bunch that would stay right until the end. Put them on TV, and it's just a great time and a great event. And they raise, I mean, it's like over $30,000, I think, at that one particular party.
Wow.
Yeah, Jim's been doing it for quite many years, and he always has a tremendous crowd every year, and I'm proud to be one of those people every year.
And I'm glad I was able to be part of it, too.
You kept Garrett up
in the show, and keep up the great work.
All right, we'll do.
All right, thank you, Tom. I was going to say, did he keep you up that night? Because if you left there at midnight, you had to get up for 4 to be at the studio.
Fortunately,
right?
I was on the night shift.
Oh, okay, good.
So it was okay.
I was going to say, you didn't even go to bed that night.
Right. It happens. But.
Yeah. Now, just, you know, this is sort of the nature of the business. We won't get into specifics, but there are people that are probably watching saying that they remember you from Channel 4, then going to Fox 61, and then back to 4. Is that correct? Those are the 2 stations you primarily worked at.
Right. It's like a pinball. You kind of bounce around on the machine.
Bounce around.
Yep.
You know, what was the time period when you were at Fox and now back at NBC? It was at least a couple years ago?
I was at Fox for about 3.5 years in 2007. And that was, you know, it was a great job opportunity, and something that is a reality of the business. It's a business thing, and obviously, you know, for me, it was a step up in career into a main position, which was, you know, professionally certainly a very good move.
Right.
But, you know, it's always hard, and I think a lot of people that have jobs and may leave for other opportunities, you always miss the people, I think, more than anything. And every job has its pros and cons. I mean, that's reality too. But, you know, and even my first job in Albany, you kind of still have those connections to the people, and so it was interesting to be in a place where, you know, NBC called me up and said, hey, can you come back and do some work for us? And I said, absolutely. And to walk in, now, mind you, in the time I was away from NBC, they went from a very old building to a very new building. Oh, okay. And if you happen to drive on I-84, right near West Farms in West Hartford, it's like a palace. You see the place they put up, and it's very high tech. So, you know, I kind of missed the growing pains of the construction, but the people, there's some new faces, but a lot of familiar faces, and so that was a nice treat to be able to go back and not have to learn 100 new names, but, you know, maybe about 25 or 30.
And when you were at Fox, was it a nightly newscast? Was it a morning that you were?
Yeah, I was on at night. So, and I'm more of a night owl, I'll tell you that. So I thought it was okay, you know. But so staying at Zandri's till midnight was fine because I'm used to being up
you were
late.
used to that. Okay. Well, I'm sure all the viewers that, you know, followed you in your career from Channel 4, NBC are happy you're back.
Yeah, I'm glad to be there. Yeah, a lot of good feedback, and you know, it's, you know, there's times in life that are challenging, certainly, but what's great is, you know, I have a lot of great friends, great family, and great viewers that are so supportive. And you see, not just me, you've seen a lot of talent bouncing around, especially weather talent in the last 12 to 15 months. So, you know, it's funny how sometimes these business things happen, and you roll the punches. You know, that is life. And, you know, I look ahead, I don't look back, because I think that's important for anybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Garrett, I was going to say every week we have a poll question of the week, which, you know, gives the viewers a chance to call in. We were obviously discussing this before the show, and we have a poll question if you want to take a crack at it. It's what was the biggest snowstorm ever recorded at Bradley International Airport? And I guess for a bonus point or bonus prize, if there is a prize, might be one of our mugs, I don't know. If you tell us how many inches fell during that storm, we'll give you props live on the air. So the biggest storm ever, biggest snowstorm ever in Hartford, and how many inches if you want to try it. That's the poll question of the week. I'll give them a little hint, because I know a lot of people are going to think that it was the blizzard of 78. So we'll say that it wasn't the blizzard of 78.
It was not.
Okay. That's just giving them a little head start.
Yep.
We're going to get to our next caller. Hello, caller. You're live and open mic with special guest GARETT ARGIANAS.
Hi, I'm Michelle.
Michelle.
Hi.
Hi, is this Michael?
Yes.
Hi. So I just wanted to know, Gary thought about, you know, what makes it more fun or interesting to be forecasting weather in Connecticut and New England rather than, you know, if you were like in boring California where it was sunny and perfect all the time.
Yeah, Michelle, you're absolutely right. It's a lot more challenging than sunny and perfect all the time. And that's something that I think is a big draw for anybody who loves weather and loves different kinds of weather. And that's why, you know, a lot of people like living around here too. As you think about, you know, we have 4 seasons. Sometimes it seems like we jump seasons around a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's part of the challenge of what I do, I guess. But, you know, I enjoy forecasting snowstorms. It is probably the most challenging thing we do on a yearly basis because, you know, usually we have snowstorms in the winter, and to pin down how much snow is going to fall. Remember that Connecticut, even though it's not physically a large state, a lot of different kinds of winter weather can occur in one storm. So you may have a case where in New London it's raining. There may be icing, say in the Wallingford area. There might be heavy snow going on northwest of Hartford, sleet, all these different things get mixed in.
Right.
So the challenge of getting it right for every town, how much snow, what are you going to see and when, and helping people kind of make their plans and prepare for their day. I mean, obviously, if you have a snowstorm that's 1.5 feet, 2 feet of snow, people are going to generally stay in, but there might be cases where, and I remember a storm back in 2007, I want to say now, I think it was December of 2007, where we were forecasting that it would be dry in the morning, but that snow would arrive during the day, and that it would be a case where you look out the window, it sounds cloudy, not doing anything. 10 minutes later, you look out the window and you can't see across the street because the snow would pick up so quickly.
Right.
And that resulted in accumulating snow basically like this. Traffic was a disaster, and it took people hours to get home. And to try to give people a heads up on that, because we did, and it still happened, but, you know, to try to just inform people and give them information. And I think the winter storms are the most challenging in that respect. Now, certainly, we have our occasional threats from hurricanes. And that's a whole other kind of challenge, but that comes more on a once every few year type time scale.
Right.
But it's nice to be able to transition and not talk about the same kind of weather every day, like maybe in California. But here we can talk about, you know, a rainstorm, a snowstorm, maybe thunderstorms, you know, all those different kinds of things into the mix. So it keeps it a lot more interesting.
Yeah, they say if you don't like the weather in Connecticut, just wait 5 minutes.
That's right, or
Yeah.
2.
Or 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Michelle, did you want to take a crack at the poll question?
Sure.
What was the biggest snowstorm ever recorded at Bradley International Airport? And for a bonus prize, how many inches?
Let's see. I'm going to say 1976.
Well, nope.
1980.
You can take a guess as how many inches if you want. We'll give you half of it right.
Half of a mug.
Okay, 22 inches.
22. Well, that's okay. Well, it's close, but no cigar.
Yeah.
Well, we thank you for trying, and thank you for the call.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, bye-bye. You see, everyone's drawn to the 70s when they hear biggest snowstorm ever.
Well, you know, something that people oftentimes say to me is, when I was a little kid, it always snowed a lot, tons of snow. I always point out, when you're a little kid, you're a lot shorter. So the snow piles look a lot bigger.
It seemed like a lot.
So it seemed like a lot more,
Yeah.
but, you know, I mean, every year's different
Yeah.
anyway. But yeah, that's something that, you know, of course, I walked uphill both ways to go to school. Now they can't
Yeah,
do school
yeah,
for
yeah.
for
I've
a
heard
lot
that
less.
one for years, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so again, if you have any, want to take a crack at this poll question of the week, it's what was the biggest snowstorm ever recorded at Bradley International Airport, and how many inches did we get? Give us a call, 265-6310. We will be here till 9 o'clock taking your calls, questions, comments, etc., etc. Garrett, I wanted to quickly talk about recently this, you know, most people obviously know about the passing of Dr. Mel.
Oh, yes.
Dr. Mel Goldstein, I think he was 67 years old, 66, 67.
Yeah.
You know, longtime weatherman, or meteorologist for Channel 8 News. Are there any things, you know, I mean, I don't know Dr. Mel personally, but did you, in your course of your career, get to talk to Dr. Mel, do any shows together? Did you meet him? Have you had any stories that you want to share about Dr. Mel?
Absolutely. Dr. Mel, of course, is a weather legend in
Right.
Connecticut. And Dr. Mel, before he was at Channel 8, and for a part of the time he was at Channel 8, he was also a professor at Western Connecticut.
That's right.
And at Western, he created this meteorology program that's still thriving today. And I've had a lot of interns over the years who have come from Western, following in that program. So I think that's one part of his legacy that I want to make sure people are aware of, because that's something that's going to go on for hopefully forever. Yeah. Training future meteorologists. Now, I grew up in Shelton, as I mentioned, and so of course I watched Dr. Mel on TV over the years, and I had the fortunate timing to meet him right when I was doing my college searching. And so I met with him. He was coming actually to Shelton to do a talk about weather at the City Hall, and I still remember this day. My mother brought me, and that was big deal.
Right. Yeah,
so I got to meet Dr. Mel, and so I spoke with Dr. Mel there. I also spoke with him. He actually came to our high school. We were participating in their weather. They had a weather net program where they put a weather station in at the school, and as part of the promotion, they would come around and do the weather, from the schools and that kind of thing. And so, he came and did the weather live, at the school, and he put me on TV.
Oh, great.
And so I'm sure there's a tape of that somewhere, probably
YouTube or something?
In my archives, and probably in the Channel 8 archives back from the 90s. So I have appeared on Channel 8, at least in that respect.
Yeah.
And, he put me on television and said, this guy's going to be a meteorologist, and, so he had that back and forth, and that was great. And he also gave me a lot of advice, about different schools to look at, and I looked at a lot of schools. I ended up deciding to go to Albany. Yeah. And, and over the years, certainly we were competitors in terms of business.
Right.
But, I think that there's a kind of fraternity that we have among all the weather people in general, and I think we all do respect each other and our individual abilities. But Mel is somebody that, Dr. Mel is someone that we always watched and respected, and I saw him probably, I think it was 2 years ago at Western. There was a weather conference that I was a guest at, and he spoke at, and didn't really have a chance to speak with him much because the students were lined up 20 or 30 deep just to talk to him, and so a lot of people were interested in speaking with him then. But someone who has just the courage and the fact that he faced such a difficult diagnosis, and they gave him, I think it was 30 months when they diagnosed him with cancer.
Oh, wow.
And that was 16 years ago. So he just fought very hard, and I think that the love of his family, the love of his work, and the love of serving the people of Connecticut really, I think, was therapeutic for him.
Yeah.
And it really is something that drove him every day. I mean, he was in pain at work, and you didn't hear about that, but we knew that was the case.
Now, obviously, Channel 8 made a tribute to him. He was their longtime weatherman. Has Channel 4, do you know of other stations, did they pay tribute to him?
Yeah, in fact, all the stations did a story about his passing and about his life, and I think that there's days generally where we're competitors. We want to win, that's the business, and we're all competitive people.
Right.
But that was a day where it's not a competitive day, it's a day where you're all friends, you're all brothers and sisters, and you have stories to tell. And they Channel 8 came into the station and spoke with us, and so you would see the weather people from our station showing up on Channel 8, and so that kind of thing happened, and that's a testament to the management that said, this is a day of respect from someone who passed away.
Day of remembrance.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Were you on Channel 8 for Dr. Mel's?
Not in that particular case.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's great. That's some nice stories with Dr. Mel, and like I mentioned to you prior to the show, there's a lot of viewers here who knew Dr. Mel personally.
Yes.
Tom Dacey being one of them, and Luann Leclerc.
Yep.
It's sad. I mean, it's one of those, you knew it was, inevitably going to happen, but I think it was almost as shocking as now hearing about Whitney Houston. It was one of those, like, you hear about it and it just doesn't sink in, and it's kind of hard to deal with it, but
it's never easy.
No, and I don't know if Dr. Mel had any kids. Does he have any children that are?
I believe so. I forget.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if he had a son or daughter that were in the field as well, which would be pretty cool. Passing on the torch. But now let's quickly talk about. And again, if anybody wants to call in, we're here till 9 o'clock. Let me just reiterate the poll question of the week. If you want to call in, it's what was the biggest snowstorm ever recorded at Bradley International Airport? If you want to call and take a guess as to the date, and I gave a hint earlier, it's not from 1978, the big blizzard of 78, so you can think much farther or much sooner than 78. And also, if you know...
It was after 78. That's the...
It was after 78, and if you want to guess how many inches, then by all means you can guess that as well. Now, last August of 2011, we had Hurricane Irene.
Yes.
Which was a big deal here, because we don't, like you said, you get a hurricane maybe every couple years that we talk about. You know, it's not like a snowstorm where it's more prevalent. What was your take on Hurricane Irene? Were you covering that?
Oh yeah.
At the time, and did it catch you by surprise? What was the, you know, I mean, it was actually downgraded upon hitting us as a tropical storm, right?
Yeah, it was definitely not a surprise, and that's something that is really a testament to the technology that we have these days, and to go way back in the history of weather. We're going back to 1938, when we've all heard about the hurricane of 1938.
Right.
That was a storm that nobody really knew was there, because technology just didn't exist to allow people to see hurricanes out over the ocean. So that was a storm that completely caught the state by surprise. Now, moving ahead, we have weather satellites. We can see these things coming, and obviously we've researched a lot more. We have a lot more of a better sense of not only where these hurricanes form and the ability to see them, but also what's the climatology, where do they go, what's the usual track of these things.
Right.
Irene's something that we saw well in advance, and I think that the people were pretty aware of it coming. It was a case, though, and it's important to point out, you had a case here now. Hurricane Gloria was 1985. That was the last hurricane to make landfall in Connecticut. So we're 26 years past, okay? Right. This was downgraded to a tropical storm. The landfall is west of here. We had more devastating storm surge along the shoreline, which is the rise in water of Long Island Sound coming inland. And that's because the storm arrived with high tide. So the two kind of add together, it makes it worse. Gloria came at a time of lower tide. The wind, which wasn't exceptionally strong, we certainly have had worse wind in previous hurricanes, still created the biggest power outage in the history since Gloria until just 2 months later, when we had, of course, the snowstorm. So that was unprecedented in its own right. But the wind was, was windy. But hurricanes, the past have had stronger winds. The rain, though, again, didn't shatter any records, but a lot of rain caused flooding, and we had some people that passed away from the flooding inland, and that was a big problem.
We'll get to more of the hurricane in a sec. We get to another call. Hello, caller. You're live and open mic with special guest GARETT ARGIANAS.
Michael, how are you?
Good. How are you? This is my friend Mike. We call him Mr. Trivia on the air.
Oh boy. Okay.
Mr. Trivia, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Yourself? How you doing tonight, GARETT?
I am great. How are you?
Good. I really have a question for you. Being alive on this earth 50 years and living in Connecticut my entire life, why do we have such crazy weather in this state? I mean, sometimes people say to me, New England weather, wait 10 seconds, it's going to change. I mean, I agree that this has got to be a winter for the record books. I've never seen this. I've never seen the grass in February. I mean, can you expound on why our weather is like rapidly changing so much?
Well, it's to make up for last winter,
Well, and the point to be made, if you were to kind of take last winter and this winter and add them together, it comes out about normal, give or take. So, and that's something that we do see in weather, is this kind of law of averages. Things do tend to kind of average out. But every year and every season is unique. And if you think about last year, I mean, we had devastating snowfall in the early part of the year. We had tornadoes that were in Springfield, the EF3 tornado, which is about a once every 10 to 20 year type tornado in this part of the country. So we do get tornadoes like that. We hit 103 degrees in July, July 22nd, the warmest temperature ever in the Hartford area. So that's not the trivia question. We had, of course, Irene. Then we had this October snowstorm. So 2011 was unbelievable in terms of records. I think it seems that we've had more of these kind of extreme type events in recent years. But we're definitely in an active part of the country, and so we do tend to get different kinds of weather, but there's really nothing that
There's no rhyme or reason to it?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that I can say, El Nino, so suddenly this happens or anything like that.
Right.
But, the weather patterns are evolving a little bit, I think. We are seeing more extremes. And we're also seeing something that, in the business I'm in the media business, is that the reporting has gotten much better. And so the awareness of these things is certainly a lot higher. So if something happens, even somewhere else in the world, we know about it the same day now.
Yep.
Yeah, well, Mike, Garrett, it was a pleasure to talk to you. Mike, once again, great job on your show. Don't forget Top Rope Tuesday night, 5:30 this Tuesday night. Special guest will be Big Daddy.
All right, Mike.
All right, it was nice talking to you. Talk to you later.
Thanks for the call. Thank you. Well, yeah, I mean, I knew this was going to be a big question tonight. I guess you can't make anyone happy. Last winter, you're going to be, if you were on last winter, they'd be saying, why are we getting so much snow?
Right.
And now it's this winter, and they're saying, where's all the snow?
Yeah. And, last winter it was a weather pattern that was locked in. And, and what's interesting, and if you have followed weather a little bit over the years, you've heard about, I mentioned El Nino, La Nina, which is kind of the opposite of El Nino, and that's a cooling of the water in the eastern Pacific Ocean. And, you think about how could that impact the weather here, but it does. It impacts the weather patterns worldwide. So then you have to try to reason out, well, if last winter it was La Nina and it snowed seemingly every 2 days, just about, this winter it's a La Nina pattern, but we're not seeing snow because there's other factors that come into play. And this is why, every year we get into like November and people want to say, what's the winter going to be like? And I don't want to say we're rolling the dice to make the forecast, but it's certainly a much different skill to make a long-term forecast versus making a short-term forecast of the next 5 to 7 days.
Well, we're going to get to our next call. Hello, caller. You're live on Open Mic with special guest GARETT ARGIANAS.
Good evening, Michael. Good evening, Garrett. Enjoying the show this evening.
Good evening, Ed. How are you, sir?
Very well, very well. And I heard you talking about, I think it was Storm Larry in '78, in the Hurricane Gloria in '85, and I do remember those tornadoes that touched down in Hamden in July of 1989.
Yes.
Yeah.
As well as the other weather events that we had over the years. I had a question for Garrett, and it was kind of more of a media question for weathermen. What do you think? There are some they're not weathermen, they're weather personalities. I'm thinking years ago of Lloyd Lindsay Young out of Channel 9.
Hello, Secaucus.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And there's one, I think he's out of Washington, D.C., Jim Kosick or something. He's an absolute madman when he does the weather. He's very entertaining. I heard a cut on Chaz and AJ did a cut of him last year, and I looked him up on YouTube, and he's just kind of a goofy weatherman. I was wondering, in your role, do you see yourself more as an informer or an entertainer? And what do you think of these weathermen that try to be entertainers? And for a change, gentlemen, I'm going to hang up and listen to your answer.
All right, Ed.
Enjoying the show.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I went to school to study meteorology, so I've always loved weather, loved the science. I view myself as an informer. I will present the weather. I do my best to not editorialize about the weather, and that's something that I think comes along the lines of being a news anchor, where I try to stay out of I like this particular weather event or I don't, because the truth is that there's people that are watching tonight and the people in the Connecticut that maybe are thrilled about this winter because it hasn't snowed.
Right.
But there's also people that love snow and are very disappointed that it's been a slow snow winter.
Yeah.
So I try to stay out of that, the editorializing, and try to just talk about what the weather is, what it's going to be. And, I think that it's also important that I'm not going to be overly dramatic about the weather, because we all know what the impacts are. But I also want to have a situation where I remember before Irene that I went on television and actually said, this is the real deal. We're not blowing this out of proportion. This is going to be a serious situation, so you need to be prepared for it.
Right.
But people need to take that seriously, and I don't want a case where, you cry the sky is falling, or the boy who cried wolf, and mixing up my metaphors. But, you don't want to cry wolf so many times that people become kind of desensitized to it and just say, he's just blowing it out of proportion again.
Right.
So, I view it as an informative part of the business, just like, a news anchor is informative, or a journalist. And I just try to keep it more about the weather and less about me and less about telling jokes, and it's not a stand-up act. It's, to me, it's a professional job to do. Now, on the flip side, of course, there are people who have had tremendous success in being more of the entertainer, weather person, but I want to be the person that people turn to when the tornado is bearing down, when there's something serious coming. I want to be somebody they trust. I think that's really an important thing to be.
And let's just quickly talk about NBC Connecticut. Your colleagues. We have Brad Field,
right?
Who was he considered the chief meteorologist?
He is, and he's been that since the mid '80s. So he's been there a long time.
Bob Maxon, who's in the mornings, right?
Yep.
And you have Ryan Hanrahan.
Yep.
And Darren Sweeney.
Darren Sweeney, right.
Okay.
Yep.
And with yourself, there's 5 total?
Right, yep.
Okay.
It's a lot of years of experience.
Yeah, I was going to say, quite a different mix of personalities there.
Right, and we're all Northeastern people. We all grew up in this part of the country. So, you know, it's something else that it's kind of special, I think.
It's not like a meteorologist from San Diego now trying to do Connecticut weather.
Right.
Can't really relate to it. These people are all
That's
from
definitely
here.
true, yes. It takes a while to learn. You can learn anywhere, but it takes some time.
Yeah.
You know, whereas now it's, you know, something, and I worked with Brad closely for years, so a lot of his skill and his training has kind of been imparted upon me now.
Gotcha.
And I think that's a nice thing, you know, it's like having a mentor, and that's great.
Well, we're going to get to our next caller. Hello, caller. You're live and open mic with special guest GARETT ARGIANAS.
Yeah, hi, Michael. Hi, Garrett.
Hi.
Mark here. How you doing?
Good.
Yeah, I got a question for you guys. One of the things when I go on NOAA, and I always look at the Space Weather Prediction Center.
Okay.
And on the geophysical stuff, how really, you know, I'm sure it does affect it somewhat, but how often do you have to pay attention to what goes on to space weather for weather here in the U.S.?
That's a really interesting question.
Very good question,
yeah, and that's something that, first of all, that space weather is outside of my area of training and expertise, so I can't speak scientifically in great detail, but generally, not a lot. What impacts the weather, and really more the climate, is the interaction of the Earth and the Sun. Not so much on a daily basis or a monthly basis, but on scales of tens of thousands of years. And that goes into, if you look in the history of climate, we've had ice ages, we've had warm times, and a lot of that is a result of that interaction of the Earth's orbit, which actually is not quite a circle, it's more an ellipse. But it actually changes shape over time, and it goes on cycles. The distance between the Earth and the Sun, then, is not exactly constant over time. The tilt of the Earth on its axis, which is why we have seasons, by the way, it's because of this tilt, but that actually varies over time as well. So those are the things kind of big picture, but that's not going to impact the weather day to day.
Right.
There are things like sunspot cycles that have some influence, but again, not necessarily day to day, and there's solar flares. But the bottom line is that we're pretty isolated from it because our atmosphere tends to kind of protect us from a lot of that stuff. So that's why we don't have to worry about serious radiation, say, if there's, you know, a solar flare or something like that. And it does throw some energy at us, but it's not enough to dramatically impact the forecast.
Well, I feel better anyway that you said that.
Yeah, we're in a bubble.
Well, thanks a lot, guys, and we miss you, Garrett.
Oh, thank you.
Mark, you want to take a quick shot at the poll question?
Sure, what was it?
It is, what was the biggest snowstorm ever recorded at Bradley International Airport, and how many inches? Just to give you a hint, it's after 1978, way after.
Well, if it's way after 1970, I would have no idea. You know, we're all guessing when we say that stuff.
All right, well, stay tuned because we'll
I don't know.
have the answer revealed soon.
2007, February.
Okay, well.
You know, that was a memorable storm. This was President's Day, I want to say.
Yep.
But that one was not the biggest, but it's on the top 10 list.
Well, at least I was close then.
Yeah,
you were close. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye. Well, they're getting closer.
Right.
So, you know, they're in the
closer.
right decade, almost?
Yeah, almost. That storm is, I'm trying to think, yeah, it was, I forget exactly where it falls on the list, but I remember working that storm, and, you know, some spots got, you know, over 20 inches of snow, so it was a good one.
Wow. Well,
yep.
Well, let's get to another call here.
Again.
Maybe that was the previous call. I apologize. Garrett, I'd like to ask you, are there any certain organizations you're involved with? I know you were mentioning earlier with Tom Dacey at the Zandries for the MDA. Are there any organizations or charities that you do currently, or are you kind of laying low on those?
I mean, over the years, I've done a number of charitable events and emceed events and that kind of thing. Something that I've done more recently, it's called St. Philip House, and they're in Plainville, which is not too far from here. But they do fundraising and housing for folks who have HIV and AIDS, and it's a support structure, for them. So I've hosted their event over the years, big fundraiser. And that's been something rather consistently over the years. I've also done things for Special Olympics. I've spoken to cancer survivors. We talked about Dr. Mel. I think we've all pretty much been impacted in some way. A friend or a relative who's had cancer. So there's a lot of things that come up over time, and that's kind of, like I said, a nice thing about the job is that people certainly generally come to us, come to someone like me for weather and want to hear about weather. But that we can get out and meet people and talk about charitable things that, we can help raise money for people, and that's important.
Yeah, it kind of takes you out of the normal environment that people see in.
That's true,
and puts you in a different environment where you can relate to them more personally.
That's true. And something else I do, and I've done this even before I started working in television, but I've been a volunteer for Little League for a long time.
Oh.
And this goes back to my days in Shelton when I started as an umpire.
Yeah.
It's
Little League. Does that mean you coach the Yankees?
Yeah, no.
I'm sorry, I'm a Red Sox fan.
Yeah. Well, then you have reason to be upset with me, so I wouldn't want that. But I always say, I work in a field where it seems like, people always want to second guess the weatherman. They also second guess the umpire. So I picked the two things where I get second guessed left and right. But I started as an umpire, and over the years I did different things. I was a scorekeeper, different volunteer roles, and even ran tournaments actually when I was in college. And now with my work full-time job, I don't have as much time to devote. But what I do is I'm a public address announcer for the Little League World Series, which is, of course, you see it on TV every year. It's in Pennsylvania, Williamsport, and that's something that I got involved there because I've done public address announcing locally. The regional tournament, which is kind of the step before the World Series, is in Connecticut, in Bristol. And that's every August. So I volunteered with them doing that, and that led to the Little League World Series. So I do both events.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so that's a couple of weeks every August.
Yeah, very interesting. Any hobbies, sports, etc. that you like? I mean, I know we were talking, you're not really a big sports fan.
Yeah, I like watching. I don't have the time to devote. When I was younger, I probably knew every baseball statistic and that kind of thing. I could have been in Moneyball, but over the years, life kind of. I don't say life gets in the way, but things happen, and when you're working 8 to 10 hours a day and doing other things and have other responsibilities, I don't follow it quite as closely. But I still, think about the end of the last baseball season, how you had all these different circumstances that were possible, all these games that were played in the final day, and they play 162 games, and it comes down to inches sometimes, and so that's pretty interesting in that respect. And so I will watch, but I'm not someone who is devastated if a certain team wins or loses. I try to.
Is there a certain team you root for in the major leagues? Or?
You want me to say it? I grew up a Mets fan, and
they're still in the league, right?
They are. I knew he was going to say something. So it's like AAA sometimes, but
they're playing the Rockettes next weekend. The Mets, right?
Rockettes or Rockettes?
The Rockettes, New Britain.
Okay, Rockettes. Okay.
Oh, Rockettes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just want to make sure.
Or the Bridgeport Bluefish, or whoever's. Yeah.
We have some great minor league baseball here. I go to New Britain Stadium every year.
Yeah, I've been to a couple Bluefish games.
Yep.
And they are. You got to watch out though with those foul balls.
Oh yeah.
There's been some really bad cases where kids, even adults, have gotten hit with foul balls and been taken out in stretchers. So
yeah, keep an eye on that. I always do that. I'm kind of paranoid about safety and that kind of thing. Being a weather person, meteorologist, I guess I think about that stuff. But I always make sure I have two eyes on the field during the game. Remember the Ravens?
New Haven Ravens, right.
Yep.
Yeah, they're no longer here.
Nope, they're not. But I remember they had those metal bleachers, and people would stomp the metal bleachers at Yale Field. So, and I used to go with my grandfather, and that's the story about the Mets, is that he grew up, and he was a New York Giants fan. Okay. So he goes, it goes back, obviously. And once the Giants left, he couldn't become a Yankees fan, because that was not allowed.
Right.
And so when the Mets came into play, in 1962, then he transitioned to become a Mets fan, and so that's how that kind of followed. But I enjoy baseball in general, and I'm someone who I will applaud a great effort and a great play no matter who makes it, because I just think it's a great thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And plus, baseball, it obviously means, or it signals the beginning of nice weather.
Warm, outside kind of weather.
Nothing's better than a nice springtime baseball game, cool evenings, but nice sunny day. So pitchers and catchers have already reported.
Wow.
For most of the teams, believe it or not. Now, one interesting thing here, and we're down to the last 15 minutes or so, you get these, all walks of life, and it comes with a territory. People say that they'd like to be wrong 85, 90% of the time in a profession and still get paid for it. And of course, they're throwing jabs at meteorologists who, tend to maybe at times, like you say, you could predict a 4 to 6 inch storm and maybe it'll be 2 to 4. So therefore, you're quote unquote wrong, not by much. But what do you say to some of the skeptics or critics of meteorologists? I mean, do you understand where they're coming from, or do you think it's a little harsh? Or
and I've heard probably everything that could be thrown at a weather person over the years, and sometimes the criticisms are absolutely right. I mean, you blow a forecast, you did, and that's something where you stand up and admit it, and point out and look back and say this is where it went wrong, because weather is very complex, and we try to simplify weather in terms of, I talked about math and physics, we try to simplify it to some basic equations. And you can't really grasp everything. So there's going to be cases where Mother Nature just throws you a curveball. Right. There's the baseball reference, but it happens. And so no matter what you think, sometimes things can go the other way, and a lot of that comes down to the data network, okay? Because we talk about computer models.
Right.
And the computer models do a lot of the busy work. They do the math, they do the equations, because anybody knows a computer is a lot faster than a human being in doing calculations. It can do them repetitively.
Right.
So and it's not critical thought, it's just chugging out numbers.
Yeah.
So the computers do a lot of the dirty work, and of course they're programmed by people. But the computer model is only as good as the information you put into it. So what we have is, of course, weather data from the surface, from the ground data observation network. And that's not just here in the United States, but in many parts of the world we have data. We also have upper air data, okay? Because remember, weather happens up there first before it happens down here. The clouds are up there. And I had a professor, a very well-known professor named Lance Bozart at Albany. And he always said the taxpayers don't live at 500 millibars, which is a reference to a height, so basically 15,000 feet in the air, okay? And that's a discussion about funding weather balloons, because that is part of your tax dollars, goes to funding the National Weather Service. And that involves not just some of the folks that provide life-saving warnings. Okay, when you hear warnings about severe weather, tornadoes, that's coming from the government. That's the National Weather Service, and they're government employees that issue those warnings. But they also support the data network. Okay, so we have, at the airports we have data, but we also launch weather balloons around the country. There's about 150, give or take, sites that launch weather balloons 2 times a day. And it's actually a worldwide event. Okay, so other countries do launch weather balloons twice a day at the same time, and that also helps fill in that data network. But the bigger thing to grasp is that the Earth is covered by about 75% water. Well, over the water, you're not going to get much data. You may have a ship that's passing through, and some of the ships have weather equipment to observe the weather so that they have that data, and some do actually will launch balloons and that kind of thing. But in general, there's that large vacuum of data. So the computer model is only as good as the data that you put into it. And the data network is pretty sparse if you look at what we would really need to even make the weather forecast more accurate. Now, as technology has gotten better, this is a long answer, but as technology has gotten better,
fine. No, it's fine.
You know, the computers are faster, we've done more research, and the forecasts are dramatically more accurate now than they were even 10 years ago. But think about, 30, 40 years ago when there was no data or very limited computer data or any way to really go beyond, a day, maybe into the future. So we've gotten to the point now where you're looking at, I think every station is doing like 7 days out, making a forecast. That's something that didn't happen even 10 years ago.
Right.
So the accuracy, in that extended stretch, it's still very changeable. We're probably better than climatology, better than 50%, but you see sometimes things will change in the extended. But in the short term, next day, we're in that about 90% range of being right, not wrong. And that's the way I always look at it in that form, because I think that we make effort into making the extended forecast, and people want to get a sense. But in terms of the most focus is going to be the next 24 hours, because that's what you need to really prepare people for when it comes to daily weather. Is it going to snow tomorrow? Thunderstorm threats in the summertime. And that's a big thing too, especially in the summer, because the weather can change so quickly, and it could be bright and sunny at 2 o'clock, and by 4 o'clock there's lightning bolts and heavy rain and that kind of thing. And what's even more challenging in the summer, and I think this is where we hear it a lot in the summer, because we'll forecast thunderstorms. And so people will say, oh, you said it was going to rain. Well, but it did rain. It just didn't rain where you are. Because the coverage of thunderstorms, it's a much smaller type of system. So we could have an example where maybe it's downpouring in Wallingford, okay? But in New Haven, there's a dark cloud going by, and that's it. And so to be able to pin it down that accurately, we can't do until the storms flare up. And that's just, we don't have that ability yet. I think down the road we will. I think technology is going to get better and better over time.
Yeah.
There's more and more research. We're going to get to the point where we can be quite accurate in terms of saying, at 3 o'clock there'll be a storm in Bridgeport. At 4 o'clock it'll be in New London. At this point, we're looking at it, more as the storm forms, then we're able to track where it's going.
Now, an interesting thing you were talking about was, the weather forecast of like a 7-day forecast, where 10 years ago you might have had a 3-day, extended forecast. Well, what's your take on for example, Channel 4, WBIT, where you are, having a website which gives a 7-day? Do you think that actually helps the station? Does it help the industry by people now don't have to necessarily tune in to get a forecast? They can just, with technology, go on their iPhone and see a 7-day forecast? Or do you think it's better that the old time where, people had to tune in?
Oh.
And we have another call, so let's get to that, and we'll get to that question in a second.
Okay, sure.
Hello, caller. You're live in Open Mic with GARETT ARGIANAS.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, hello. You're live in the air.
Could you define for me what you mean by weather? Define weather, because I think we make a lot of assumptions when we talk about weather. Well, what is weather?
All right. Well, what's weather? That's actually something that we studied in college, because there are different definitions of things like weather versus climate and that kind of thing. But basically, weather is, first of all, what's around us, what's going on in the atmosphere around us, okay? And that might be discussion about, is it raining or snowing? Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? What's the temperature? What's the moisture content of the air? We talk about dew point and humidity. Those are things we look at. We look at wind. So there's a lot of different things, and things that you probably kind of casually don't even notice, day to day.
Right.
But, you walk outside, you say, hey, Lou, it's warm today. It's kind of nice. Or, oh, it's kind of cold. I have to wear a scarf and gloves. That's weather. Okay, climate is something that is a longer term discussion. Okay, that's something that's, an average of weather over a great period of time. And that's a little bit of a different thing that you'll look at. And so an example I like to think of is you could have a month, say, where it's very cold to start and very warm to finish.
Right.
So in your mind, the weather was cold, then warm. But the climatology is going to say, well, it's average, because you add them together and it ends up being average. So, in terms of discussing weather versus climate, you actually have to be specific about it. And sometimes the data can be misleading, and that's something that, in terms of, reporting weather, you have to make sure you're really digging into it to not be misled by it.
That makes sense.
All right?
Did that answer your question?
That's very good. Thank you very much.
All right.
Miss you on Channel 5.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Good night. Okay, so technology.
Yeah, 7-day forecast is now at the hands of an iPhone or website. And
Right.
Do you think that makes people not tune in as much as they once did, or do you think it doesn't affect it?
It makes life more challenging for a news station. You know, what's happening is that technology is taking off. It's, you know, people are able to get weather forecasts from many, many different options now. It's not just the TV and the newspaper anymore.
Right.
So what is happening is we are seeing, you know, people that are seeking the forecast maybe on their iPhone or their Android or that kind of thing versus watching the traditional newscast. So what we've realized as a business is that we're not in the business of television news. We're in the business of content provider. So we're going to give you that content, whether it's on television,
or on
whether
your
it's
phone.
on your phone, on the web. We want you to get it from us.
Gotcha.
Okay, but what we're not going to do is shoot ourselves in the foot and say, oh no, we're not going to get involved in this internet thing, because let's be honest, that's where we're going.
Sign of the
That's where
times.
it's going.
Yeah. We're going to get to another call here. Hello, caller. You're live on Open Mic with special guest GARETT ARGIANAS.
Good evening, guys.
Evening.
Good evening.
Backfeed here.
Backfeed Bob, how are you?
Good, guys. Just wanted to thank the meteorologist for showing up at the Jerry Lewis telethons that we've had over at Zandri's for many years.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Like I said, that's something that was always one of my favorite events. And talk about a night that flies by. I mean, it's, you know, a long number of hours, but the night just always flew by. It was always
It's
a
like
great
the show
time.
now. We're
Right.
all done.
Yep.
So in you walk, and now all of a sudden, all the ladies and gals are saying, is he married? Is he not? Is he dating someone? Is he not? Geez, he's taller than I expect. He's really nice. Listen to him. I didn't expect him to be anything like he is. Oh, what a treat.
Oh, well, appreciate the call. A lot of people, you know, of course you meet a number of people over the years, and most people say to me, oh, you're taller in person than you look on TV. That's because on TV they even us all out. So
Yeah, I didn't realize how tall are you?
like 6'2".
6'2",
Well, you're
yeah.
probably, what, 6'4"? You're
6'5".
6'5", okay, yeah. I'm not used to looking up at people, so
Yeah.
that was a bit different. But yeah, you know, I think that, you know, I'm a pretty genuine person, so what you see on TV is what you get in
Yeah,
person.
absolutely.
But, you know, it is funny how people have different perceptions, or they just, you know, people build things up in their minds sometimes, and, you know, you see me on TV for 3 minutes.
Well, on another note,
Yeah.
I can't help but oversee at various times on the internet where some of the meteorologists are now becoming women. And the stations that have these women, it's obviously they haven't put them on camera because they are fully licensed meteorologists, but because their presence and their physical makeup is such that you're going to be watching the cloudburst continuously when they're on.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's a couple of points to be made, and certainly...
Backfeed, thank you for the call.
Thank you.
And Garrett's going to finish us off, and then we're going to wrap things up.
Okay. The trend for a long time was for men to be studying the science of meteorology, and that goes way back. But what's good is that we are seeing more women come into the mix to study meteorology and study the science and become weather presenters. So, you know, I think that, you know, and that again is a discussion about trying to get more girls interested in science. And I think it's important to have that kind of diversity and to bring different people into the fold and not base it on gender, but base it on what you want to do and what you're good at. I think that's important. You know, but he brings up a point that, and this goes way back in the history of TV, and it is, you know, we're news, we do news, but, you know, there's also a certain entertainment value sometimes to news, and it depends on who's running the station and what they want to present. But, you know, in the history of TV weather and back before we had a great grasp of meteorology in general, but they would hire, they called them weather girls, and they were, you know, like models basically up there just to, you know, they didn't have training at all. That goes way back in time.
Well, I apologize. I wanted to say we are down to our last minute.
Oh, wow.
So
Went
we're
by,
going to wrap this up. I want to thank all the callers for calling in tonight, and a very special thanks to you for coming
absolutely.
on. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. GARETT ARGIANAS. Round of applause from the studio audience.
applause and everything.
There you go.
Thanks so much.
Next week I'll be on with special guest Steve Knight at 8 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen. For my special guest, Garrett Argianas, I'm your host, Michael Cuomo. Good night, everyone.